I'm a weak man. Ooh, man, you are strong. Yeah. I'm a weak man. Ooh, still I belong. Yeah. Your grace is enough. Your grace is enough. I'm a weak man, but you lift me up. I'm a weak man.
All right, so welcome back to the Weak Man Podcast. Coming to you a little late, unfortunately. I was trying to make sure that these episodes come out every Wednesday. Just getting back from vacation. Had a lot going on, but I did not want to let today end before I just shared some thoughts. And so unfortunately it'll go out a day late, but hopefully it'll be right on time and right when you needed to hear these comments. Just sharing from some of my personal experience, just, kind of some of the things that I was facing and dealing with personally, and some things that I shared with some guys that I meet with. And, I think that it's important for us and again, this message is really going to be geared toward followers of Christ. And I was reminded this morning that, the closer that we get to Jesus and the more that we go after him and follow after him with everything that we have, that, the enemy of our souls is going to take notice. And so I was reminded of a passage in Matthew 22. And in this scene, it's right after Jesus has, had what we call the Last Supper. So he's just met with his disciples. He's essentially told them someone that's among us is going to betray me, and then we see this scene where he seems to pull Peter aside, and starting in verse 31, he says, "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift each of you like wheat, but I have pleaded in prayer for you, Simon, that your faith should not fail. So when you have repented and turned to me again, strengthen your brothers." And so in this scene, we see that, these are the men that walked closest with Jesus. These were his disciples. They were with him every day. They were, men that we look back at as heroes in the faith. But here, Jesus is telling Peter, be prepared. There's a battle that's coming. And it's a very similar scene to what we see in the book of Job, where curtain is pulled back, and we see what's going on in heaven. And, Satan comes before God, and he's like, God says, "Where have you been?" And he's like, "Well, I've been going to and fro in the earth." And God says, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And so, I really was just kind of personally going through, just had a bad day, and then as a result was kind of beating myself up a little bit and just saying, like, come on, you're supposed to be, a leader among men, and people look up to you, and they look to you for encouragement, and now you're the one that's, down in the dumps and needs encouraged. And it's funny, this morning I told one of the guys that I meet with that, kind of had a rough day, and he's like, "Well, that's funny. I didn't hear about it." And he was challenging me, like, "Hey, why didn't you call? Why didn't you pick up the phone? Why didn't you send me a text and say, hey, I need you to pray with me, or I need somebody to talk to?" And I chose to isolate myself, and then I thought about this scene, and also thought about Peter whenever he, he does, deny Jesus. It seems as though Peter is also isolated in that moment. And, It's if we go forward to verse 54, it says, "So they arrested him and led him to the high priest's home, and Peter followed at a distance. The guards lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat around it, and Peter joined them there." So Peter wasn't with the other disciples. This doesn't seem to indicate. And it's almost like in battle. Again, I kind of referenced this to some guys this morning. It's like in battle. If you're with a couple, of your comrades, you can kind of go back to back, right? And each of you can, have each other's back. But if you get isolated, then you're going to be easy to pick off from the enemy. So, just a little bit of encouragement today is that if you are, having one of those days where you feel down, you feel depressed, or, the thoughts of you're questioning yourself, and maybe you're depressed, or you have anxiety, you're anxious. That's the time when you need to speak up. Reach out to a friend, a brother. Maybe it's your wife. Maybe it's your mother, father, whoever kind of that spiritual go-to in your life is, and speak up and just say, "Hey, I'm struggling today. I need someone to pray for me or pray with me, or I just need to get together and let's talk, and I need encouragement." I do believe that the enemy desires to isolate us, and get us alone, and we're a much easier target then. So when I went a little further, and I wanted to really dig into sifting wheat, what does that look like? What would that have meant? Why would Jesus have used this specific metaphor to explain the trial that Peter was going to face, and really the other disciples? Because he wasn't only in that context. The New Living Translation actually says, each of you is sift each of you, and I believe in some other translations it just says sift you, but there it's a plural. So he's talking about all of the disciples, but what does that mean? What was he trying to tell him? So in the first century, sifting wheat was the final and crucial step in separating edible grain from the inedible husks or chaff after harvesting and threshing. This process was routine, often daily. So again, this would have been a common occurrence. This would have been something that the disciples, and Peter specifically here, would have understood. And it involves a physically demanding process. And this would have been done on the threshing floor. And so threshing or breaking, this would happen before the sifting. So the wheat stalks were broken apart to dislodge the grain, either by beating them with sticks or trampling them with animals or using a threshing sledge. And then there's the separation part, winnowing or wind separation. So the farmers would use a large fork or shovel to toss a mixture of grain and chaff into the air. Because the chaff was lighter, the wind would blow it away, and the heavier grain would fall back down onto the threshing floor. And then the sifting would be the final cleaning. So the remaining grain, which might still contain small debris, dirt, or leftover husk, was placed into a sieve or a large shaker, and this was shaken vigorously, allowing the good grain to fall through while separating out the final waste. So, the part there that really stuck out to me was the shaking vigorously, right? So, sometimes it can feel like we're being shaken. So the final part, the sifting, this would have been the part where the grain that was remaining, and it still might contain some small debris or dirt, is going to be shaken vigorously, and that's going to allow the good grain to fall through and separating the waste. And so, the biblical analogy, again, it's a metaphor of intense testing or trial. It's implied that a violent shaking process would be used to remove the worthless elements while the valuable grain was kept. And so, I can imagine the conversation that we maybe don't see here, again, because it does indicate that there was permission that was asked. It says that Satan has asked to sift each of you like wheat. All right, so again, this takes us back to a very similar conversation that might have happened, where Satan is asking for permission, and permission is given. And so, just as here that Jesus says, I've pleaded for you in prayer. Again, we need those brothers or sisters to come alongside us and to lift us up in prayer, because as we get closer to Jesus, then we become that target, and then Satan is going and asking for permission to attack us. And, again, a lot of times permission is going to be given. And, as we look at this analogy of the sifting, it is a purification process. And so those trials that we may be facing feel really difficult in the moment when we're going through them. But, God's not going to allow them just so that we can go through a tough time, just because he wants to see us suffer. That's not the kind of Father that we serve. No, he is more concerned with a purification process. And as we want to get closer to him, just like in Old Testament times, there was a purification process before the priest could enter into the holy place in the tabernacle. And just as we want to enter into his presence, there has to be that purification process. So I want to encourage you today, stop trying to face these trials alone. Quit falling into the traps of the enemy to be isolated and to feel like you have to face this life, of service to our King alone. Number one, Jesus ever intercedes for us in heaven. And so, you're never alone, even if you feel like you don't have anyone on this earth who's going to walk through it with you. But I would just encourage you. I've said this on, many of the other episodes, and just, really to anyone that I've spoken to recently, is community is so important in this Christian life. You cannot just go to church on Sunday and then expect to live out the rest of your week all alone. And yes, we are sent out into the highways and the byways and into the workplace and the gym or wherever it might be, and we're called to make disciples. But we, as we're pouring out into other people, we also need to be poured into. And that happens through that biblical Christian community. And so make sure that you have a group of people that you can get together with and be encouraged by, and also that you can be that encourager and pour into them. So I hope this speaks to you today. I somewhat feel like it was a little bit of rambling, but sometimes it's hard to really get across what's in your heart and what's in your mind. Again, I would encourage you to go back in and read the story of Job, and then read this story in Luke 22, and just kind of see those parallels. Dig into a little bit more, maybe drop some comments of some things that maybe God shows you through that reading and study time. Or if you have questions, or if you need someone to pray with you, or you need a friend, whatever it is, send me a private message. I'd love to invite you to our men's Bible study that we have every week. You can join through Teams if you don't live in the area, or if it doesn't fit with your schedule. And just get plugged into community and don't give up. Yes, you may be shaken vigorously right now by the enemy, but hold on tight, because it's just a purification process, and that's so that you can get closer to him. So I hope you're encouraged. I love you, and God bless you.